Bobcat gives birth. Near her rescuer's home. The reason will warm your soul. It had been 3 winters since Emma Turner had first laid eyes on the Bobcat, a fleeting, quiet encounter that had left her with more questions than answers. She had been living in her cabin at the edge of the forest for nearly 5 years, finding solace in the isolation that came with living so far from town. Her days were filled with routines, tending to her garden, caring for the few animals she had taken in, and walking the forest trails that wound through the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. Life, though simple, had a rhythm to it that Emma cherished. But that spring, the rhythm was interrupted. It had started as a low, hoarse cry, one that echoed through the trees near the edge of her property. Emma paused, her hand stilling on the doorframe as she stepped outside to listen. The cry wasn't the familiar call of a bird or a distant coyote. It was something different, something raw, something filled with pain and urgency. Emma's heart quickened. She knew the forest well enough to recognize distress when she heard it. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and slipped on her boots, making her way toward the sound. The snow was still heavy in the mountains, but the lower trails had begun to thaw, and the air had a faint warmth to it that told her spring was near. She moved carefully, her boots crunching on the still frozen ground, until she reached the source of the sound. There, hidden behind a thicket of young pines, was the Bobcat. She lay low on the ground, her body trembling. Emma could see the faint outline of her ribs, the deep exhaustion in her eyes. The Bobcat's chest heaved as she tried to move but stumbled, her steps unsteady. Emma's breath caught. The wild creature was hurt, and there was something about the way she held herself, the way she paused, watching Emma, as though waiting for her help. For a moment they simply stared at each other. Emma had known her role in the wilderness. She wasn't one to intrude unnecessarily, but this time there was something undeniable, something that pulled her toward the animal. Emma knelt low, her movements slow and deliberate, trying not to startle the Bobcat. Without hesitation, she made the decision. "I'll help you," she whispered softly, as if speaking to a child. "I won't leave you out here." Emma didn't know how she did it, how she managed to coax the Bobcat into her cabin, but somehow she did. It wasn't easy. The animal was wild, instinctively wary of human presence, but there was a deep trust in her eyes, something Emma couldn't explain. The Bobcat allowed her to guide her to a soft bed of blankets Emma had prepared, her trembling legs barely supporting her as she collapsed onto the makeshift nest. Emma spent the next several hours tending to the injured creature. The Bobcat's side was bruised, likely from a fall or an attack, and there were signs of exhaustion. But there was also something else, a subtle, quiet presence. Emma had a way with animals. She always had. She'd nursed birds back to health, helped injured deer find their way back to the wild, and even cared for a mother fox who had lost her way. But this felt different. The Bobcat's eyes, large and golden, held a story Emma couldn't read. But she knew she was meant to help write the next chapter. That night, Emma left her cabin door open, letting the cold mountain air rush through the crack, hoping the Bobcat might find some comfort in the sounds of the forest. She didn't expect much, but she left food for her just in case. When she checked the next morning, the Bobcat was gone. Emma's heart sank at the thought of her fleeing back into the wild, unsure if the Bobcat had fully recovered, or if she was simply too afraid to stay. But to Emma's surprise, the Bobcat returned that afternoon, this time with a different presence. She moved carefully, quietly, her golden eyes scanning the open space before slipping through the cabin door. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The Bobcat was not alone. Emma could just make out the faint shapes at the creature's side. 2 tiny spotted forms waddled forward, their movements clumsy and unsure. The Bobcat had given birth. Emma froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the blanket as she stepped forward to get a better look. The 2 small kits were weak, their eyes still closed, their tiny bodies trembling. The mother watched Emma closely, as though giving her a silent command. She wasn't asking for help. She wasn't asking for permission. She was simply allowing Emma to be part of something she'd never seen before. The unspoken bond between them was almost tangible, one that Emma would carry with her for the rest of her life. It was then that Emma realized the true weight of the Bobcat's trust. She had brought her young into Emma's home, not because she was incapable of caring for them, but because she had known something deep within the wild. Emma wasn't just a rescuer. She was a sanctuary, a refuge not only for the body but for the soul of this wild mother. The days that followed were filled with quiet tenderness, a rhythm unlike anything Emma had known. She watched as the Bobcat, now called Luna by Emma, took careful care of her kits, keeping them nestled in the corner of the cabin by the warmth of the stove. Luna would venture out, her eyes still cautious but trusting, to find food. But she always returned to her babies with an almost fierce devotion. Emma had set up a small area near the cabin's hearth for the family, a place where Luna could rest and nurse her kits in peace. But it was clear that Luna was wary of letting anyone too close to them. Emma respected that. For the first few days, Emma kept a distance. She made sure the food she left out for Luna was plentiful, providing fresh meat from the wild deer she had harvested earlier in the season. But every time Luna returned, her gaze was full of silent communication, her posture changing subtly to show she was ready to trust Emma a little more each time. It wasn't a sudden change, but a gradual shift, one that Emma respected. Then, one afternoon, after several days of Luna staying close and taking her time to heal, Emma found herself in the cabin kitchen preparing dinner when she heard soft, cautious steps behind her. She turned, and there, in the doorway, stood Luna, not alone this time. The kits, no longer helpless, were padding behind her, their tiny paws quiet against the wooden floorboards. They were curious now, their golden eyes wide as they took in the new world around them, their movements still shaky but becoming more confident by the day. Emma paused, her heart swelling with an overwhelming sense of awe. These little creatures, these wild kits had been born into a world of uncertainty, and yet here they were, in the safety of her home just a few feet away. It was a precious moment, not just because she had saved their mother, but because she had become part of a cycle far older than anything she could fully understand. Luna, noticing Emma's gaze, shifted closer to her kits, her body language, protective but not fearful. She looked up at Emma, her golden eyes steady. There was no aggression in her stance, no hesitation, only acceptance. The kits, too, seemed to understand. They crept closer, their small, soft paws barely making a sound as they moved across the floor. The first kit, a female with slightly lighter fur, was the bravest. She sniffed Emma's outstretched hand before tentatively rubbing her cheek against it. Emma's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. The kits were young, wild, untrained. And yet, here they were, trusting her in a way that transcended all logic. Luna remained a few feet away, watching the scene unfold, her sharp eyes never leaving Emma. It was clear the wild mother wasn't done protecting her young. She wasn't ready to give up all her instincts. But she was giving Emma something rare, a chance to be part of this precious family's new beginning. It was then that Emma realized the depth of her connection to these creatures. Luna had brought her kits to her, not because she couldn't care for them, but because she trusted her. The bond between them wasn't built on need alone, but on something more, understanding. The understanding that the wild could be tamed, not in a cage, but through respect, through mutual trust. And in that moment, Emma knew that her life would never be the same. As the days grew longer, the bond between Luna, her kits, and Emma deepened. The wild mother had come to trust Emma more with each passing day. She allowed Emma to move closer to her young, though still, Luna kept her watchful gaze on everything. The kits were becoming more active, more curious, and their tiny paws left soft prints in the dust as they explored the cabin and the small yard surrounding it. Emma found herself laughing more, something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The kits, though still wobbly, would chase each other in circles, pouncing on anything that moved, whether it was a shadow, a fluttering leaf, or even Barley, who had become their playful, albeit reluctant, companion. They were wild, to be sure, but there was something almost magical in their innocence, in the way they'd learned through play and mimicry. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Luna's movements changed. She had become more restless in the past day or two, constantly pacing around the cabin's edge, her eyes shifting between the forest and her kits. Emma could sense the change. Luna was ready to leave. At first, Emma didn't understand. Why leave now? The kits weren't fully strong yet. They still stumbled, still fumbled over their own paws, and still needed warmth and protection. But as Emma stood at the window, watching Luna, something shifted within her. Luna wasn't leaving because the kits weren't ready. Luna was leaving because it was time. She could feel the pull of the wild, the need to return to what was hers. Her family, yes, but her place in the world. And Emma, in her heart, knew that this was a gift. The wild wasn't meant to be tamed. Not by her, not by anyone. And Luna was teaching her that, just as she had taught her kits. That evening, after the stars had come out and the mountain air had cooled, Emma found Luna sitting by the door, her eyes fixed on the forest. The kits were curled up near the fire, their small bodies gently rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. Emma walked slowly toward Luna, kneeling beside her, her fingers brushing against the rough fur of the wild mother. "I understand," Emma whispered, her voice barely more than a breath in the night air. Luna tilted her head, those golden eyes, locking with Emma's for one final moment. There was no fear in them, no sadness, only a quiet understanding, as though Luna knew this was the way things were meant to be. Emma wasn't her prisoner. She wasn't even her caretaker. She was something else, a safe harbor, a place to heal, to grow, and then to return. The next morning, Emma woke to find the cabin silent. The fire had died down to embers, and the kits were gone. At first, her heart sank. She had grown so attached to them and so attached to the bond they had formed. But then she heard a soft rustling outside the door. Luna and the kits had returned to the wild, their small bodies slipping through the trees as the sun rose over the mountains. They were free. They were home. Emma stood at the door for a long while, watching them disappear into the dense woods. A part of her wanted to call them back, wanted to keep them close, but she knew, deep in her heart, that this was the greatest gift she could have ever received. Luna had brought her kits to her, had shown her trust and love in a way she hadn't expected, and then, in a final act of love, she had returned them to the wild where they belonged. Emma turned back into the cabin, feeling the warmth of the fire against her skin, her heart full with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest acts of love were the ones that set others free. The seasons passed in their quiet, relentless way, and Emma continued her life in the cabin. But something had shifted inside her, something subtle yet profound. The presence of Luna and her kits, even though they were now gone, had left an imprint on Emma's heart. Every time she stepped outside and saw the towering pines stretching into the sky, or heard the distant cry of a coyote in the night, she remembered. The wild was a part of her now, not just something she lived near, but something that lived within her. One autumn evening, months after Luna's departure, Emma was walking along the familiar trail by the creek when she heard a rustling ahead. Her heart quickened, expecting the usual deer, or perhaps a family of rabbits. But as she rounded the bend, she stopped dead in her tracks. There, standing at the edge of the creek, was a bobcat. Not Luna, but a full-grown female. She was sleek and strong, her coat a rich, deep tawny color. Her golden eyes caught Emma's gaze immediately. The two of them stood there for a long moment, neither moving, as if caught in the quiet understanding of a shared memory. The bobcat didn't run. She didn't turn away. Instead, she approached Emma with slow, deliberate steps, her movements as graceful as the wind itself. Emma's breath caught in her chest as she recognized her. One of Luna's kits. It was the same kit Emma had noticed first, the one who had been so curious, so bold, the same kit that had rubbed against her hand that first day, now standing. Before Emma, she was a creature of the wild, no longer the fragile thing that had stumbled into her cabin for protection. She was strong, independent, and free. She had found her place in the world. The bobcat paused a few feet away, looking at Emma with the same golden eyes as if to say, "I remember you." Emma knelt slowly, her heart full. She didn't move closer. She didn't reach out. This was her moment to honor the wildness that had returned, the wildness that had come full circle. For a long moment, they simply stood there, sharing the quiet, unspoken bond they had formed. Then, without another sound, the bobcat turned and disappeared into the trees, her movements swift and fluid, as if she had always belonged to the forest. Emma remained still for a while longer, her eyes fixed on the spot where the bobcat had disappeared. She had helped raise her, had shared a brief but powerful chapter of her life, and now she was seeing the result of that trust. The wild had returned her to the earth, and Emma understood that this was the way it was meant to be. As Emma turned to walk back to the cabin, a soft breeze lifted the last of the autumn leaves, scattering them across the path. She smiled to herself, a quiet peace settling in her heart. The wild wasn't just out there, it was in here too. In her. Luna had given her a gift, and now her kit had returned to show Emma that the circle of life, in all its cycles, was unbroken. The wild was still alive, and its heart was as strong as ever.